Will Agnes marry Commander Weston? Episode 7 of The Testaments quietly delivers one of the darkest turning points of the season. There are no massive public executions or shocking twists designed purely for spectacle. Instead, this episode builds tension through silence, fear, and psychological pressure. And by the end, Agnes finds herself facing a future that may be worse than anything she imagined. The biggest question after watching Commitment is simple. Will Agnes actually be forced to marry Commander Weston? And after everything this episode reveals, the answer looks increasingly terrifying. The episode opens with Daisy under enormous pressure as tensions between Gilead and Boston continue escalating. With Radio Free Boston reporting heavy Gilead losses at the border, the political atmosphere is becoming more unstable, making her undercover mission even more dangerous. This also gives us more of Daisy's backstory. We finally see what happened after June left her behind earlier in the season. What initially looked like abandonment was actually part of Mayday's test to determine whether Daisy was capable of surviving under pressure. Rita's return here is especially important. She reveals that Daisy wasn't meant to simply disappear into safety. She was being evaluated for something much bigger. Daisy's decision to stay and fight instead of fleeing to Colombia marks a major turning point for her character. This wasn't just bravery. It was the moment she fully committed herself to the resistance, and that commitment is tested immediately once she enters Gilead. The most intense sequence of the episode comes when the eyes suddenly arrive at the school to interrogate the Pearl Girls. For a moment, it feels like Daisy's mission is over. The tension in this scene works so well because Commander Weston doesn't interrogate her aggressively. Instead, he carefully probes her story, asking questions about Canada and her background while silently studying her reactions. This makes the scene far more disturbing. Weston isn't looking for obvious lies. He's analyzing emotional inconsistencies. The detail that makes this scene even more chilling is the discovery of Daisy's radio sitting openly on Weston's desk. This feels less like evidence and more like psychological warfare. It's a silent warning, a reminder that he may already know far more than Daisy realizes. The episode's cruel twist comes when Talia is taken away instead. On the surface, this appears to be Daisy's lucky escape, but there's another possibility. Weston may have intentionally allowed Daisy to remain free so he can continue observing her. That possibility makes him far more dangerous than he initially appears. While Daisy faces external danger, Agnes begins confronting something equally terrifying, the reality of her future. Her heartbreak over Garth not being among her chosen matches is devastating because it represents the destruction of one of her last private hopes. Agnes has spent her entire life trying to be obedient. She follows the rules. She accepts Gilead's teachings. She tries to believe the system is just. But this episode shows those beliefs beginning to crack. That shift is most visible during her conversation with Daisy. This scene is one of the episode's most quietly powerful moments. For the first time, Agnes hears firsthand what life outside Gilead is really like. The idea that people can choose their own partners deeply unsettles her. Her immediate reaction is to dismiss it as confusing. But this isn't true rejection, it's defensive conditioning. Agnes has been raised to fear freedom because freedom threatens everything she has been taught. The scene with the pre-Gilead objects beautifully reinforces this idea. Agnes invents innocent meanings for these artifacts because the real truth would force her to confront how much of her world is built on lies. Daisy's decision not to correct her is especially telling. Rather than shattering Agnes' illusions, she protects them. It's an act of compassion, but it may also delay Agnes' awakening. Then comes the episode's most disturbing sequence, Agnes meeting Commander Weston. At first, the interaction seems polite and formal, but beneath the surface, it reveals exactly what kind of man Weston is. When Agnes asks about his previous wife, she commits a subtle act of rebellion. In Gilead, even asking the wrong question can be dangerous. Weston's response is deeply unsettling. He explains that his wife died in childbirth, but when describing the worst day of his life, he only mentions losing his child. He never mourns his wife. That omission speaks volumes. To Weston, his wife was never a person. She was a vessel. Her death matters only because it cost him his child. It's one of the most chilling pieces of dialogue in the entire episode because it exposes his worldview without needing explicit explanation. And then the episode gets even darker. Paula later reveals that Weston remains interested in Agnes precisely because of her rebelliousness. He likes difficult girls. This line completely changes the meaning of their interaction. Weston isn't drawn to Agnes despite her resistance. He's drawn to her because he sees her as something to dominate and break. That is what makes him so terrifying. He isn't impulsively cruel. He is deliberate, patient, and calculated. So will Agnes marry him? At this point, all signs suggest yes. Weston's abrupt departure wasn't rejection, it was intrigue. Paula's panic confirms she understands exactly what Agnes has done. She made herself more appealing to a man who enjoys control. From a storytelling perspective, Weston has also been built up too carefully to disappear now. The show is clearly positioning him as Agnes's immediate threat, but this may also be the event that finally pushes Agnes toward resistance. If Agnes is forced into this engagement, it could become the catalyst that shatters her faith in Gilead completely. The Garth and Becca storyline adds another layer of tragedy. The episode finally confirms that Garth's feelings for Agnes are real. Their brief moment together carries unmistakable emotional weight. But Aunt Lydia pairing him with Becca feels intentional. This may actually be part of Lydia's larger strategy. She likely knows Agnes would never realistically be allowed to marry Garth. By placing him with Becca, Lydia may be ensuring Agnes still has an ally nearby, someone who could help her later. This fits Lydia's pattern throughout the season. She rarely acts openly. She manipulates circumstances behind the scenes. And finally, Rita's cameo confirms one of the biggest truths hanging over the series. Agnes is June's daughter. This revelation raises the stakes even further because Daisy's mission is no longer abstract resistance work. It's deeply personal. She is now directly connected to Agnes' survival. That connection will almost certainly become critical in the episodes ahead. So while episode 7 strongly suggests Agnes is heading toward marriage with Commander Weston, it also makes something else clear. Agnes is changing. She's beginning to question, beginning to resist. And in Gilead, that's where revolutions begin. Commander Weston may believe he's choosing a future wife, but he may actually be setting in motion the very rebellion that helps bring Gilead down.